It's 10:30.
I'm at about the end of my papers.
We will call the development committee meeting to order. Roll call, please.
Member Krajewski. Member Covert. Here. Member Garcia. Here. Member Ozog. Here. Member Rutledge. Here. And Chair Torrance.
Here. I'll entertain a motion to allow Member Rutledge to participate remotely under the governor's orders. Motions are second. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
And motion carries, and Member Rutledge is a member of the committee.
Thank you.
Also entertain a motion to amend the agenda and take items 6, 1, and 2 and move them to the end after the regulatory services agreement, so that the people who are here under those can leave if they desire. A motion to amend the agenda.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye. Aye.
And the agenda is amended. Public comment, I believe we have one person. For public comment, Phil Lukenhans. Phil?
Yeah, I won't take much of your time. This item is item A and 6A. Billboards, it was the same billboard that was approved a couple of years ago. We had to move this line slightly west because of the location near the mosque and easement questions. Same relief request as last time, same variation, same conditional use, turned into a LED sign. As you may recall, we're taking down 2 signs and replacing with this smaller one. Prior sign had to be moved for safety reasons because cell towers were allowed to be put up so close to it that we couldn't maintain the sign. As I said, the sign is the same size but lower height. I know Glen Ellen objected. I also objected 2 years ago when we were here. It's the same form of objection that says we don't allow these types of signs in Glen Ellen, but that is what it is. The hearing officer recommended. We would just ask them to recommend this. Do you have any questions? Thank you.
Thank you. That concludes public comment. Move on to approval of the minutes. I'll entertain a motion to approve the minutes of January 18, 2022. There's a motion second. Any additions, corrections, or deletions? Hearing none, seeing none, all those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed, the minutes are approved. Moving on to budget transfers, I'll entertain a motion to approve a budget transfer to balance FY 2021 expense budget line.
So moved.
Motion second. Any comments, questions? All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? The motion carries. I'll entertain a motion to approve the budget transfer to balance
So moved.
FY 2021 personnel budget lines.
Second.
Motion second. Any questions, comments? All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? The end of the motion carries. Moving on to regulatory services, I'll entertain a motion to approve DCO 15-22 ordinance zoning 22-000004 Z21-108 Lamar Advertising. This is a zoning hearing officer's recommendation to approve variation increase overall height of a new relocated advertising sign, variation increase the sign square footage, variation to reduce the front line setback of the proposed billboard sign, and a conditional use to permit the installation of back-to-back 14x48 LED digital display panels. That was a motion. Is there a second?
Second.
Any questions, comments? Okay, hearing none, seeing none, all those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Motion carries. I'll entertain a motion to approve DCO 16-22 ordinance zoning 22-000007 Z21-100. Sostrand Association and the zoning hearing officer's recommendation to approve variation to reduce the front yard setback for a new sign from 50 feet to approximately 1 foot. It's a motion and a second. Any questions, comments?
I do have a question, Sam.
Yes. Member Rutledge.
Thank you, sir. Just a quick question. I'm not going to oppose this ruling, but I believe that they said that there was one location that they could think about putting this sign, but that it was densely wooded. And as I looked at the photographs, it looked merely like buckthorn. And so that's my question. Are we considering that valuable vegetation that would keep a sign from going in that place? Because if that's the case, I don't think environmentally that's the best policy for us.
So
Yes.
this is a replacement sign. Their existing sign was actually over the property line. It was damaged in a storm. And at the hearing, they determined that the only location to place this was at the location that they have it 1 foot away. So they're actually moving it onto the property this time. And due to the weeds, the trees, the bushes, and then actual utility poles, this was the only visible location. And that's actually due to Route 83 coming in. This property is located on Meadowlark. So to be visible for the Route 83 traffic, they needed it in this location.
Okay, thanks.
Any other questions, Sheila?
No, sir, thank you.
Anyone else? Okay, hearing no other questions, there's a motion and a second. All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? And the motion carries. Entertain a motion to approve DC 017-22, ordinance zoning 22-000008. C21-103 Thomas, zoning hearing officer's recommendation to approve a variation to reduce the interior side yard setback from 7.6 feet to approximately 5 feet.
Second.
A motion and a second. Any questions, comments?
I would like to comment on that.
Yes. Member.
The letters that were attached to this request were very positive for the neighbors.
Yeah.
It's nice to see.
Mhm.
Always nice to see positive.
Positive for the neighbor and the garage.
Any other questions, comments? All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? And the motion carries. Before we go on to old business, then we'll go back to item 6, informational. Do the presentation from Tuska first. Okay, so we'll go to 6.2. This is our presentation from Tuska and Associates regarding the Lake Street Corridor zoning overlay plan. We heard about this some months ago, but we're back, and or is Tuska's or whomever.
I will introduce Pesca. They've been here before for the Route 83 plan. This is a little bit different. This is actually building on an approved plan from 2014. It's an implementation to do an overlay district for Lake Street. And really this is to help alleviate the code enforcement issues we've had out there, land use conflicts, and to make a more cohesive corridor. Roselle and Hanover Park. So before we really have the same zoning ordinance and an overlay, that we won't have this conflict arising with the land uses. I'll turn it over to Pesca.
Might want to go over here. So the camera can see. There you go.
Tell me where to go, everybody goes.
Right there.
That's fine.
In terms of waiting for the PowerPoint, we'll just do introductions. My name is Michael Blue. I'm a principal at Tuska Associates. We're leading a project which will end up in a common zoning district to be adopted by the county and the municipalities that will regulate development along this stretch of Lake Street, which I will show you in just a minute. But just a bit about us and our team. We are here. Tuska is, as you know, we've been here before, but Tuska is a land use and urban design firm. We do all forms of land use, comprehensive planning, zoning, and so on and so forth. And I'm very pleased to be working on the project. Appreciate the county's commitment to it. I'm going to ask my colleagues to introduce themselves in just a second. So please, Carol, you get started.
Sure. Carol Brobeck, associate with Tuska Associates. I work with Michael also on the Route 83 plan and working now on the Lake Street.
Kurt Asford, I'm a partner with the law firm of Vance & Link. I focus on land use and zoning and help rewrite zoning codes like we're doing for the county and the municipalities.
David Silverman, a partner with Dan Lake as well. We pair with Tuska frequently on these types of zoning projects. This one obviously has a unique legal component because it's multi-jurisdictional. There's a code enforcement issues. So we're helping with that part of it especially.
So I would tell you that it's always a little intimidating to have your presentation be described as 20 minutes, which is a great place to start and a great way to limit us from doing this. But we want to do two things. We want to show you where we are with the project. We want to show you some of the interesting things that we have found as we have done our due diligence in the area, some of the challenges and opportunities that will come when we get around to doing the drafting of the zoning. And then we want to hear from you in terms of your concerns and thoughts about the corridor, and that'll become clearer in a little bit. So I'll start the presentation. If it's not going along, I see you all have it, and that's fine. So the second slide is the presentation outline. I'll just kind of summarize where we are and where we're going. Outstanding. Thank you all very much. The next slide talks a little bit more detail about the tasks that we're up to. So we had a kickoff. We met with the staffs from all the communities. We've created a steering committee, which involves staffs and in some cases appointed or elected officials from all the communities. We've shared with them a
more in-depth version of this presentation as well. So now we're coming to more of the public engagement and community input. So we're doing jurisdictional workshops, which is this step right here. We'll also be going out to the communities generally to talk about the issues. So we'll know what officials are concerned about, what officials' ideas are, what officials' goals are, and also same for the community generally. If we go to the next slide, when we started this, it was clear that there was a specific intent of what was to be done here. And this ties back to what Jessica just started us off by saying, why are we doing this? There are land use conflicts in this stretch of Lake Street, there's no doubt. We're looking to incentivize redevelopment. We want to address some of the code enforcement issues that are out there. Code enforcement issues get amplified between different jurisdictions, obviously. Create some consistency so there's a more consistent form of development. Find some common goals for the corridor. And last but not least, we're working with CMAP as part of this project. It's an LTA, so they're funding a chunk of it. So we want to incorporate some of the wisdom that's in the 2050 plan. What's interesting about this slide is that this is basically what staff is doing every day, right? And so that's why, as Jessica said, this is very much an implementation task. So the issue of dealing with code enforcement, finding better land use, making best use out of the zoning district, that's really what your staff and the staffs of municipalities are doing every day. So that's a real valuable part of this project. That's why we're working so closely with the staffs and the municipalities so that it's very implementable and it's commonly agreed to. The next slide shows study area. Always fun when the road is at an angle, but it's Lake Street basically from Bloomingdale Road up until Gary, a little past Gary on the north there, and specifically 1,000 feet back. The lines that you see on here are the municipal boundaries. I would tell you that this is sort of the first thing that we learned. We've done a number of jurisdictional projects. Route 83 was mentioned, but the way the boundaries work here is going to be interesting. The next slide starts to outline some of the physical characteristics that we found. So if we can keep going. Talk mostly about four things. What are the primary findings that we found? What are the land use trends that we found? What are the characteristics there, and what are the zoning regulations? This analysis generated a 90-page existing conditions report, which you are all welcome to. It also, I'm no fool, we also created a 20-page summary report, and better yet, a 3 or 4-page issues report, which was really what everybody needs to know. And we can certainly make that available as a summary to this. Part of the reason the report was so long is that as zoning and development issues, there's a lot of different things going on. And since there's 4 jurisdictions, there's a lot of different sets of policies and applications and regulations that apply to all those different things. So again, one of the primary findings we had here was the complexity of the task before us. Not that it scares us off, right, team? Not that it scares us off, but it really does set the standard for what we need to do. And I'll keep going. I'll show you a little bit more about that. In terms of general objectives for the corridor, one of the things we did first was look at comprehensive plans and talk to the staffs of each of the jurisdictions about general broad goals for the corridor. And they're very similar. They're the things that were on that first slide. That's where those really came from. The specific objectives get a little bit different because they depend on unique ongoing policies, code enforcement. Bloomingdale's thinking is very much driven by the Old Town area that's right there at Lake Street, so that kind of sets a standard. Hanover Park at the far other end has got a couple of very unique one-shot development opportunities there for some large and substantial development. Roselle's got some nice development in there, but they've got a couple of development pieces that are big questions. And obviously the county's issues are about ongoing development, securing the best possible economic development things to happen there, and finding the development to do that. So there's some difference there. The history of regulatory practices has created a very interesting development form. Eclectic, that's the word that we use. Development pattern out there. And that's going to be the challenge. As you've seen developments, I'm sure you've seen that long skinny lots are a challenge. Shallow lots are a challenge. Lots with cars parked right up to the property line are a challenge. We have all those things out there. So let's keep going and we'll touch on just a few of those. I'm not going to dive into all of these, just given the time and the fact that you have them in front of you. So I'll touch on a couple, and if I skip one that you want me to go back to, please. One of the challenge that's really created here is that this area has developed over a lot of time. It developed from a rural area to a more traditional suburban corridor. That's left behind a lot of platting and zoning challenges that make what we're up to, well, a challenge. There's been very little long-range planning for it, except for the plan that was mentioned earlier. The retail and office market is so different now than it was just a few years ago. There was a heyday of development, and then that went away, and now development is changing again. So we're kind of developing regulations for a market that hasn't quite settled yet. So that's something that we're going to have to be creative and thoughtful for. Right behind the frontages of these lots are residences, right? So change is difficult. Understanding a lot of them are your constituents as well, right? But there's opportunities there. There's opportunity, as I mentioned, towards the Hanover Park end for some substantial development there, and the redevelopment potential. So more challenges and opportunities, but the opportunity is to clean up the challenges. We go to the next slide. Shows you a little bit about this, and yeah.
Just a real quick question on here. You're saying that the retail and office markets have changed drastically. Where do you see, what's the future that you see coming forth in that? Do you have any idea?
Everything is going to happen slower. People are not, there's not as much speculating as there was.
Okay.
People are going to look for a more predictable, logical process, because the developers that we work with and interview as part of other projects, they tell us they need to know how things are going to happen. Right, so they're not willing, you can't take away all their risk, but they're looking to smooth out their risk. So they want to know if they come to the county or they come to Roselle or they come to one of the communities, what is this thing going to do to them? So the codes that we write with Ansel Klink are really about predictability of process.
Okay.
That's really the best way to do it. The other is to think more in terms of categories of land use and activity rather than specific businesses. So create flexibility, create predictability, but kind of build it on a set of standards that all four jurisdictions are comfortable with.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Please.
Quick question. I'm familiar with the area, but would you say that the family home or the housing behind these areas, multifamily, single family, kind of a combination of both for this corridor?
Yes. It's primarily single family.
Okay.
Primarily single family.
It's
There's
sort of in a subdivision type of
Right.
situation. And would it be fair to say, I mean, I've lived here 37 years, but that's not really an area I go to that much. Would you say most of the development, last 25 years, 25, 30 years? Like there's a shopping mall to the
right.
to the west of the Walgreens there on the north side or the south side of Lake Street, that sort of thing.
Yeah. So yeah. Some of the more modern development is on the north side of the road in Roselle. There's kind of the traditional suburban shopping center. It's set back pretty far. Kind of hard to see. That's a bit of a problem too if you're a retailer. But that's what's been going on most recently.
That would be more like the one where that brunch cafe is. Is that in the area we're talking about, or is it beyond Gary?
We're still
French Cafe is east of Gary.
Yeah.
Gary. Okay. Yeah. All right. Thank you.
Sure. So this is just an example of the analysis that we did, that Carol put together, that shows some of the challenges. And again, the depth of those lots, I'm sure you've seen this over and over again, makes for a real challenge, because a commercial developer wants the front 150 feet of that, right? And so these lots are significantly deeper than that. And so we're going to have to figure out how to make this a developable area. The other thing that's important to do is to look at consolidating properties, because that's how you get a more significant, substantial development that supports economic development. So I love this graphic. This really kind of lays out the fun that's ahead of us. Next slide. So in terms of corridors or characteristics of the corridor, all of these say pretty much the same thing, which is there is tremendous variety in what's out there. There's variety in the types of uses. There's variety in the types of shapes of lots. There's variety in the scale of the development. There's variety in where the parking is found. There are a lot of nonconformities. And so part of this, the regulatory and design part is one side of it, which is what do we want it to look like down the road as things develop. Part of the question to deal with is how do we deal with the nonconformities that we're certainly to create? And as David was saying, that's one of the reasons that there's a lot of legal issues here. We know that there are some uses that we want to have go away ultimately. There are some properties where it's not necessarily the use, but it's the way it's located on the site. And so it might be too close to the road, the most common one. So those are the challenges we face. In terms of the opportunities, the differences between the jurisdictional regulations is one of those. Defining what that consistent size, format, and layout of design is going to be. Again, we'll start that process. We'll put something out there for people to react to, for each of the jurisdictions to react to, but there's got to be a comfort level of there. And there's a lot of different rules for signs that are out there. And where, when, and how that becomes consistent. Again, our approach will be to say, we've reviewed the policies and goals of the jurisdictions. We've looked at what's out there. We've looked at the trends of development in the area. Here's an idea of how to approach it. And then we'll kind of refine it from there based on what is comfortable with for everybody. Let's go to the next slide. A couple of quick pictures of what's out there. And again, this is as much to show how much variety there is as anything else. So this is the land use. The deep red is retail, traditional, commercial. The purple are the more industrial kind of uses, more heavily impactful activities. There's actually some green out there, which is a good thing. But to go back to the point we were talking about before, you can see just how close the residential is to a lot of this activity. And so we anticipate that at some level, some amount of regulation relating to buffering from different uses is going to be an important part of what goes on here. So let's keep going. There's actually several different characteristics of corridor. One of the notions when all this started was that, oh, you know what we can do is we will create an overlay that will regulate the whole area. Well, if you've driven through the area, you know there's not really one version of Lake Street between these two ends, right? There's Old Town on the one end, there's the industrial that's more appropriate up at Gary, there's some traditional shopping in between, there's some unique uses mixed in there. They're different formats. So the idea of creating kind of a monolithic set of regulations may not work. Truth be told, I'm not sure how to do that with the overlay just yet, but we'll figure it out. So that's really what's out there for us. A couple more slides to talk about the character of what's out there really quickly. Some of the things that we find, again, that you'll notice if you drive up and down the corridor, landscaping is kind of inconsistent. There's, again, different standards, and some areas have developed, some haven't. If we keep going, you'll see that the parking setback varies. Like I said, some of it is on, close to, maybe a little over the property line, and some of it is way set back. So that's very different. Obviously, one has got a more desirable appearance from a development standard. If we keep going, you see the parking typically is at the front of the road or at the front of the lot. Again, a typical suburban concept. This one actually works pretty well. It's got landscaping out there. So part of what we're doing too is looking for models of things that work pretty well that we want to continue, right? So to create an entirely new approach is really better to build on stuff that's out there that's working well. So if we keep going, you see a couple more of these kind of points. The circulation, again, it's haphazard is not the way to describe it, but in terms of interconnects between properties. Sometimes there are, sometimes there aren't. In terms of getting into the neighborhood, sometimes you can, sometimes you can't. Sometimes you want to, sometimes you don't want to. So again, part of the regulations will be about how do you impact, or how might development on the front of the road impact the residential behind? Or is there a spot where the residential behind could be part of the redevelopment? Don't know yet, but those things are all on the table. We have made no decisions or recommendations for you yet. We'll keep going. I mentioned signs and the variety of signs and sign regulations that are out there. I'm just going to let David and Kurt deal with the signs, so I'm not really worried about that. If we keep going, again, I think I've probably already touched on this, but in terms of the zoning regulations, it's the variety of what's out there and creating a consistency of design between the communities. But there's those same opportunities, right? And so setting, I guess part of our take from this is that it's pretty straightforward to create the district that could cover the whole thing and set a standard and allow redevelopment and good development. It's just how much of a, not a mess, but how much of a challenge do we create in terms of your ability to regulate the development, the municipality's ability to regulate the development, and that we're not creating something that's so complicated that it's scaring away the development community so that they don't want to be part of what we create. So there's a lot of balls in here in that regard. And the next one is kind of the last slide that talks about that variety of what's out there. This is the mix and match of zoning that's out there. In general, it matches the land use, commercial on the road, residential behind, a couple of industrial pockets. But again, this is part of the challenge. That blue way out there in the corner on the right side is Bloomingdale's Old Town District. Again, a very unique element of this that we need to think about how to incorporate. So that's what we found. That's the variety of stuff we found. I would turn to the team and see if there's something I ran through too quickly or missed or forgot or they'd like to add.
We laid out the challenges as well as the opportunities very well. So,
and I want to thank Carol too, because she really dug deep into all of this to truly understand for us what we were kind of up against in terms of doing this. We didn't think it was going to be easy, but now we have a really good handle on the things that need to be addressed. The next slide asks if there's any questions. Glad to answer them. And then I do, if we have just a couple minutes left, Mr. Chair, a couple of policy questions for the group. So,
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So what reception have you received from municipalities to date in terms of just general, what do you think?
everybody's very positive about it.
Okay.
The municipalities have been eager to have this project come forward and is very appreciative of the county's commitment to it for a couple of reasons. One, code enforcement, right? So from a municipal standpoint, code enforcement on an unincorporated property is a challenge just because there's different rules and you can't get on top of it just the way you would if it was in town, right? Two is there are some rather undesirable uses that are out there that everybody gets phone calls about. Three, the towns all get calls about about unincorporated areas and other towns saying, hey, I want to build here. What can I do? Well, you're not in Bloomingdale, you're in, right? And so those are the reasons that we're hearing that the towns are very much looking forward to doing this and are very supportive of the effort.
Okay. Thank you.
I've got a couple of questions. I'm very familiar with this area. My office is on Lake Street. It's my district. I don't live too far from there. I have some property there. So, and I'm very happy that we've gotten as far as we have. How did we get to the depth of the corridor on either side of Lake Street? I mean, you say it's, X number of feet, 1,000 feet. How did that limitation come to pass?
It was in the RFP. So it was established before we started the project. But the idea of looking what is almost a quarter of a mile back, the idea was to be sure that we were doing two things. One was considering the impacts that development right on Lake Street could have on the residents that were behind. And two was to understand the possibility that if something big was going to happen and needed to go further back than just the traditional 150 feet of a of a commercial frontage, then it was being considered as part of it.
Okay, because obviously the deeper you go on either side of Lake Street, the more impact you're gonna have on the residential areas, because those are the ones that are farthest away from Lake Street.
Right.
Ultimately, what we're looking for here, just if you look at it from 30,000 feet, is to have this property in whatever geographical area we have, to have one set of zoning regulations, which are going to apply for that property, whether or not that property lies in Bloomingdale, Roselle, Hanover Park, or unincorporated. Given that, who would ultimately have the enforcement power to regulate those zoning issues if it were in one town versus another?
This is why I bring my lawyer with.
Well, I'm a lawyer, and that's why I'm
Nope,
asking
I'm
the
stepping
question.
back
So
here.
that's why I'm asking. I don't know what's gonna
We're
happen.
still, no, that's, it's a critical question. So some of the ideas that we talked about at our last session in Roselle, it's Roselle, right?
Yep.
Yeah. An intergovernmental agreement among the various jurisdictions to coordinate process. And maybe even looking at the regional plan commission model as a possibility for the area through an intergovernmental agreement concept. And while that might not be a body that in of itself would have veto power over development in one community over another, they can at least make recommendations to the community on how to blend it into the overall plan that we're going to come up with. So you need, in our view, as we're looking at it right now, you do need a central coordinating committee like that if you're going to take a multi-jurisdictional approach like we're doing here, just to make sure that everything's blending into the goals and objectives that everyone's agreed to ultimately.
Well, obviously, it's an intergovernmental agreement because you've got different jurisdictions, but again, is there presumably within that intergovernmental agreement, all the jurisdictions are going to decide that either the county or some group is going to be in control to make decisions through whatever process to regulate the zoning and the adjudications. Okay. And then lastly, this is when this comes to pass, and hopefully it will, in the not too distant future. This is presumably all prospective in terms of the zoning regulations. I mean, if a property is there now, regardless of what the intergovernmental agreement and the new regulations are, that property is going to be able to remain there, I assume, even if it doesn't conform to the new regulations.
Yeah, our goal wouldn't be to create a bunch of Fifth Amendment takings problems. So yes, we would have some concept of non-conforming use, but putting in place incentives and things like that, at least strategies to evolve the development patterns in that area to the more consistent, desirable outcomes you want to see.
Right. Well, we do have a positive. I mean, I've talked to each of these mayors on numerous occasions, had a number of lunches and coffees with them, and it's been something which we've been looking forward to, and you guys have done a remarkable job to get to where we're at working with our people here at the county. So keep up the great work and keep moving forward. Yes, I'm sorry, Mary.
I ask one more question. In terms of, would you envision something, for instance, let's just take signage, and there would be really specific, you could be very specific with height, with face, all of that sort of thing. So would you envision where each community adopts the signage that's been agreed to as their zoning code, and then you would still be dealing individually with, like you're trying to build in Roselle, you'd still have to deal with Roselle's code, but then you've established, for instance, signage, you'd establish these core criteria that you would want to try to meet. That's sort of the overview.
Absolutely.
Okay.
We talked about this a little bit, but again, we're, as Michael's own presentation just indicated, we're still formulating a lot of the thinking on this and how best to proceed. But like the model ordinance that would be adopted would have some plug and play features. There'd be some like definite, consistent provisions for all the communities involved. But then there can be some unique plug and play aspects to it. But things like signage, anything that builds corridor character, you want to have as much consistency on that as possible. And some of the strategy will also be urban design through that corridor as well to tie it all together. We think that's a very important part of this whole piece as well.
So you try for consistency as you.
Oh, yeah,
try to
for sure.
redevelop.
Signage plays such a huge role in that, of
Yeah.
course.
If signage, setback, and landscaping are relatively
Landscape.
consistent,
Yeah.
Right,
you don't have to go a whole lot further than that to have a nice
True.
looking corridor.
right.
And I always try and keep that in mind as I drive down a corridor. What is it that, as you drive down, that you go, hey, this is nice? What probably strikes you is the amount of landscaping, the comfort of the setbacks, and the quality of the signage.
I mean, it really presents a great opportunity to show how regional cooperation on planning and development issues can coalesce to really remake a corridor that's kind of central to all the communities involved like that. So this is a problem throughout the region. It's not just, obviously here in DuPage, we see it everywhere we work. So.
Mr. Chair, enough time is limited. We had a few questions. If we can spend a few minutes discussing them, great. If not, I would just invite everybody to email us back with.
If
any
the
comments.
committee doesn't mind, if you've got a couple of minutes, we're done with our business. We've got something that Jim Strand's going to bring to us, but go ahead, as long as you're here.
So the PowerPoint's down, but if you turn to the page of the PowerPoint, it's got discussion questions on it. It's right after that. One more. There it is. And it's before that one, before that page. Going before that. So just a few questions, and we don't, thank you very much for the slide. We don't need to go through these in great detail or even in order, but one of the things we're going to ask you and ask all of the communities has to do with major concerns that you all have for the corridor, long-term goals for the corridor, and some of this you've alluded to, and what do you think is the greatest impediment to meeting those goals? And maybe we will just kind of start at the top. And what are your concerns or goals for the corridor?
I mean, one of my greatest concerns is kind of what you just talked about, is a unified vision for the corridor, which does include, in my opinion, landscape. I think that is a huge draw for the area. So it's beautifying more the landscape and making it more concise and so that when you're driving down, you just feel like, it's a beautiful drive. And so you're attracted more to the area. I think that's going to be something that should be actually really prepared for and really emphasize that.
Great.
A concern I would have, I'm gonna be specific here. Caputo's, where the grocery store is, I believe that's Springbrook Center.
Mhm.
And I think you can see this throughout the corridor that we're talking about. It seems like there's definitely an issue with developer maintenance of the property. The parking lot there, that kind of, I don't want to call it neglect, but in terms of, resurfacing a parking lot of that size is a major
Ongoing property
undertaking.
maintenance.
And that's where you're looking at 25 years, 30 years, that
Yeah.
sort of thing. So that would be my concern, that there's a share of somewhat elderly properties there that could probably use a real facelift. Maybe that's something that could be considered in terms of what villages might have in terms of grants, funding, whatever, money. It always comes down.
It comes down to money, but one of the things we've done in codes before too is that when you do a substantial renovation of a property, for instance, that you bring some of these kinds of things up to code, that there are thresholds for a level of reinvestment, not to make everybody who, puts a new facade on a building has to completely redevelop their site, but zoning can include some of those thresholds. So that's an interesting way to look at it as well.
Yes. Sorry.
I would just piggyback off, I agree with member Garcia here. The aesthetics are important, the cohesiveness, and I think if it looks a little bit more modern as well. When I was going down, for example, Gulf Road in Schaumburg, they have in the evening they have these purple light bulbs in there, and I know it's something small, but it just seems really new and modern while you're driving at night down, Gulf Road. And it's like, okay, this is a really urban, really updated environment. And maybe that would be just to kind of spruce it up a little bit and attract more people to the area and make it look, like that's the place you want to be.
So,
Okay, interesting, thank you.
Yeah, cohesive streetlight.
Other goals or concerns for the corridor?
My greatest concern about the current status is probably the same as the greatest impediment to meeting those goals, and that's the current property owners in some of those properties. We've got $750,000 townhouses next to an adult bookstore. I mean, it's just crazy the way it's been established. So that's problematic to the residents, obviously, and would continue to be. And all of the things that were said earlier are important. My understanding is there's 50,000 cars or something to go up and down Lake Street a day, some ridiculously large number. So the landscaping and entrance into the areas, those are my concerns. And again, those impediments, right? And because there's so many smaller lots, you've got a number of, there are some property owners who own a significant portion of Lake Street, as you probably have found out, but there's still a lot of individual owners and individual lots of properties that you're gonna have to deal with.
I can't complain about the landscaping at Platt Nursery.
That one
They are
I'm not
complaining
complaining
about.
about. Okay, no, I'm not complaining about that one.
Or the big building right next to it, which is where my office is.
So let me just close with that. Are there any other concerns about impediments? The chairman mentioned a couple, but are there any other impediments or concerns? I often call them landmines that maybe you could tell us about.
One concern which actually already brought up is, maybe, getting some of these to divide the properties up, because, I worked for the Village of Lisle for many, many years, and we were working with Ogden Corridor, and that's always seemed to be part of the problem, was that, some of the same things were happening with that, where we had these really narrow or really long lots, and, there has to be some kind of cohesiveness with that also, in terms of so that there is, that we could figure out what we could do with both parcels, and so that, it's getting the property owners to want to be able to do that. So that's going to be, I guess, the lawyer's headache.
You're right.
How are you?
That's a great point. Thank you.
Yeah.
So we're not disappearing. We're thanking you for your time this morning. If you think of anything, you come up with anything, please let Jessica know, and she'll let us know. This is the first of these meetings. We've got a meeting scheduled with Roselle, and looking to get on the village board agendas with Bloomingdale and Hanover Park as well, to have the same sort of discussion, so that everybody is on the same page, knows what we're up to. And I think from the communities too, if there's going to be a concern about implementation, like you said, who's going to have the final say here?
Right.
And I assume everybody's going to want the final say of the property in their town, right? I don't think that's unreasonable. I don't think there's any way around that. But as David pointed out, there's a lot of ways to have a unified recommendation that precedes those kinds of things, or a unified set of policies and standards for by right development. So that's what we're hoping to learn as we continue this part of the process with each of the communities. So thank you very much for your time.
Thank you.
Appreciate it very much, and looking forward to continuing the project.
Thank you. Who's John? Oh, there he is. Oh, I'm sorry.
Just want to talk to you real quick. Sorry about that.
Thank you.
Just didn't want to interrupt again.
Okay. Move on to the second informational 6.1. Fiscal year 21 strategic initiative implementation summary update. That's Jim.
So I'll be brief. So we have 5 initiatives this year. We'll really be talking about 4, because number 5 is the corridor, which you just had, a nice presentation on. So our first initiative was the use of technology to help improve permitting process. As you probably know, we went live January 31st with our new electronic software. So it's allowing people to apply online. Our contractors register online, our applications are coming in online, code enforcement, everything's being run through it. It's going pretty well, I think. It's a completely different world. Everything we've done since time began was on paper. So to all of a sudden on day one, flip over. So we have literally, anybody who's making an application has to do it online. We took even people who were in the permitting process. If you had been reviewed and rejected, you had to resubmit. You're going in online. So you got to scan your stuff, got to get it into us. Contractors had to renew online. So it has been 2 very difficult weeks. It was great. We had the Acela staff on site, the development team that helped us for the last 2 years. We have access to them for the remainder of this week. And then we switch into our managed services agreement, which we had signed late last year, and then our regular maintenance. So we'll have good access to them for the next, well, the managed services is a 1-year contract with the option to renew after that if it's going well. But overall, that process is working well for us. It was a partnership. Stormwater management was already in the Acela program. They've been in there for about 3 years. So we kind of got to see how that worked out for them. We've had some improvements in their system as part of ours because we bought a much larger program than they did because we handled so many different areas. They were using it just for their drainage reviews and stormwater certifications. We're using it for code enforcement, finance, everything you can think of that's in there. DOT is using it as well. They have a number of permits, their road permits, their small cell permits, their impact fees, all that's going to be handled through there. They're doing a much slower rollout than we are because it's a little bit smaller package for them. And then our Public Works Department handles their sewer and water permits through there as well. So they've got a piece of it. So it's kind of nice that it's across all 4 groups. We're also working with the health department. So there is a health department in our workflow. And we have taken a couple of our seats and just plugged them into them so that they can literally just get the data the same as we're getting it as it's going to the zoning it would go to the plan examiner, it's going to the health department in the same format. So that'll hopefully streamline the review process we have with them as well. So overall, we'll see how it goes. I'll tell you in 6 weeks once we really see what it's like. The second initiative was to periodically review and update our codes. This year we updated the building code. We went from the 2015 ICC codes to the 2021s and the 2020 National Electrical Code. They're off cycle with each other by 1 year. So we reviewed our residential code, which is the county code. We made some updates to that as well. And then we also updated our fee schedule this year to kind of help fill some of the voids in what the automation would do with the software. There were some fees that we had never collected before for work we were doing. So we added those in there, like $100 for some of the zoning work that those guys are doing there. There's a list of 4 or 5, I think, things that people were requesting on a fairly regular basis that we were not charging for. To make those requests in the automated software, it automatically wants to assess a fee. So we put in a fee to do it. So it helps kind of recoup some of our time. The next one is the code enforcement and adjudication program. So that's been a big part of the software as well, is getting all of our summons and other documents in there electronically. It's been a bit of a challenge to create all these things because they're all considered individual reports. We're working through that right now and continuing to expand every year with the adjudication. I noticed that Paul has in here also the clean and lean program. So we've been working on that. We have a couple of houses right now that are in the works. We just cleaned a property just north of here last, December? So it's a guy that we've been after for about 10 years. He's just been doing everything he can to not do anything. And it has to ultimately, you have to take him to the clean and lean program through adjudication and then ultimately to court to get him, to comply. So we are at the point now where we've gotten authorization from the judge to clean the property. And now we're working on the authorization to take the house down. So then we'll lien his property and try and recoup our costs. So hopefully that's going to work out. The last initiative is the CRS, and we're working on we are currently a 6. So we're working on our renewal right now. We do an annual renewal, and then this will be the 5-year will come through this year as well. So this will be a bigger look into it. We're also working with the ISO rating people right now, filling out our rating for the building department. So we're currently we're 4 in there. So trying to maintain the 6 CRS, love to see it become a 5, but there's big hurdles to cross to go from one step to the next. But you get a 5% savings for every point below 10. So we're helping the community. And then the 5th one again was the Lake Street corridor, and we just had plenty of that. So I don't have anything to add there.
Thanks, yes.
I just had a really curious question regarding the lean and clean. I know this was an old case, probably from a couple of years ago, but in District 5, there was a property off Hobson Road, and it was this big, gigantic mansion with a Spanish roof.
Yep.
Is that still there? Because it was under construction, and it just became an eyesore.
Patrick, you want to touch on that? We were ready to take them back into court again this
Well,
month.
as part of ongoing litigation.
Yeah. Can't really talk about that.
Is that gonna be an executive session or?
I guess I would refer
So
to.
we had filed summary, well,
Well, can't talk.
yeah. I
We can't talk about it. Okay, that's fine.
If we want to have an executive session about it, another meeting, we can't have it. There's some upcoming court dates that are important at the end of February.
Okay, the only reason why I ask, is because it is my district and people do ask me about it and I have no idea what's going on, so.
Maybe we do need an executive session.
Yeah, I would request an executive session to just be included in the next executive, it's not pressing, but.
We
the next
can
one.
add that to the agenda of the next meeting for an executive session if you want to do that.
I would recommend April for sure,
Okay.
based on these court.
Yeah, I was just gonna say, you've got, right now, the answer would probably be your constituents. It's in the court system.
Right,
It's
yeah.
working its way through and,
I believe our next court date is the date after our next meeting.
okay,
So
all right, so maybe April.
Okay, because I just don't want any like squatters in there. or anything. It's just,
No,
and that's kind of scary.
neither do we.
A question for you. What property maintenance code are you guys at now? You know?
The 2021.
Oh, that's fantastic. Yeah, you guys are really keeping up with those codes
Yeah,
in terms of
we-
keeping them up to date. So that's great.
Yeah, we went straight across their platform with everything, the pool code, the fire code, the fuel gas code, the mechanical code, property maintenance code, the IBC. The only thing we don't adopt is the residential code.
All right, fantastic.
Any other, yes, Mary?
I do have to tell you, it looks like the Acela software stole their name from the high-speed Amtrak service in the Northeast Corridor.
That wouldn't surprise me.
If yours has one C, theirs has one C and yours has two Cs, so
They are a worldwide organization, so I'm not sure how long.
somebody
they've been-
stole something from somebody.
Probably.
So. But I'm not a copyright lawyer, so anyway.
Well, thank you, Jim. Thank you for that, and thanks for all your hard work on those initiatives. Any old business? Any new business? Hearing none, seeing none, I'll entertain a motion to adjourn. All in favor?
Aye,
Any opposed? We are adjourned. Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
covered a lot of ground.